Brothers and sisters, it's so good to be back before you for my final time in this debate. I want to say that it has been fun. I've enjoyed it, and it's been educational, been enlightening. And I want to say I appreciate Elder Weatherly and also Pastor Carroll for their efforts. And again, thank you, Pastor Neely, for permitting us to be here. Having said that, I want to go right to my chart, number 68, that is up on the screen before you right now. This is where I left off before. The Apostle Paul, oh, by the way, thank you for putting on that hat. It's yours. You may have it. I figured you were a Razorback fan, or maybe give it somebody who is. Seeing him wear that was worth it. Amen. It's okay to have fun. And it's okay to be a little jovial in what we're doing. All right. Wives, submit to your husbands. The core problem for women. We've talked about the core problem for men being loving their wives. If you don't believe men have problems loving anybody but themselves, just look around you in your neighborhood at all the man toys that they spend money on, and see how much money they spend on their wives. Sometimes, too much of the time, it's disproportionate. So men, Christian men, have to constantly be on the guard to show the proper care and love for their wives. Women, on the other hand, have to be on their constant guard to show proper respect and proper submission to their husbands. Now, if you don't believe what I'm about to tell you is true, try to get the women in your congregation to put on a head covering next Sunday and see how much flack comes your way. But the Bible says, but I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered dishonoreth her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven. And Paul is making the comparison there between the covering of hair and the covering of the RAC. On the chart before you are two pictures. One of them is of a Pentecostals ladies meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1932. And there is not a woman in that picture, I haven't counted them, but it looks like that there might be 30 or 35 there, without some form of head covering on. Now we fast forward from 1932 to a women's meeting of the UPCI of the Missouri District. I couldn't find one of the Arkansas District, but I did find one of your neighbors. And the Missouri District ladies meeting, recent, just in the last couple of years. And look over that vast crowd of women, and you find not one head covering on, not one, not anywhere. So we ask the question, what happened in this interim? And I'll tell you what happened. Feminism happened. And you think that our churches are free from feminism. Well, they're not. My next chart, please, 69. Many of you will remember, some of you will not because you're not old enough, in the 60s, the latter 60s and in the 70s, the newspapers, and those of you who did have televisions then on the TV, were, oh, I'm sorry, not TV, but on your monitors, were pictures of women burning their bras in public in protest of male headship. Now, you will remember that, and we all thought how horrible that it was. But it was in that very decade that the head covering disappeared in the churches, not only Pentecostals, but Protestant churches and Catholic churches in the West. Now, during that time, National Organization of Women, now, NOW, the acronym NOW, published this statement in their December 1969 paper. And I quote, "Because the wearing of a head covering by women at religious services is a symbol of submission within many churches, now, NOW, the National Organization of Women, recommends that all chapters undertake an effort to have all women participate in a national unveiling by sending their head coverings to the task force chairman. At the spring meeting of the Task Force of Women and Religion, these veils will be publicly burned to protest the second-class status of women in all churches, December 1969. Now, I want to ask a question to end this series of my charts. From whom are Christian women getting their marching orders? From the Bible, where Paul says, for a woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors the man? Are they getting their marching orders from the Bible? Or are they getting their marching orders from NOW, the National Organization of Women, that had a head covering burning at the same time that those particular women were having a bra burning? So I submit to you that not wearing a head covering or removing your head covering is equivalent to ecclesiastical bra burning. Let me have my chart, please, 26. And when we go to my chart 26, there's something very important that I would like for you to notice. We're going to 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 15. But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. Now, my friend spent a lot of time on that, but this is my affirmative speech. Her hair is given her for a covering. Not only hair, but the King James says her hair is given her for a covering. But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. Now, the Greek words here are kome, ante, paraboliou. And I want to define these three words, because these three words are very important. My friend says when one thing is given in the place of another, it replaces it. Now, is he agreeing now with Seagraves that the first Paul taught for several verses about the veil, and then when he gets to verse 14 and verse 15 in particular, he says, forget about what I've just taught about the veil. Now we're replacing it with hair. That's what some of his brethren believe. I'm not accusing him of believing that, but it sounded sort of like it. Maybe he can straighten it up when he comes back. He has the last speech. So let's define these words, kome. I asked my friend last night, are there any Bible scriptures that teaches a woman should not cut her hair? He gave this word, kome, for an evidence that it means long uncut hair. Well, Strong's, Greek number 2864, says that this word kome means ornamental locks and tresses. And it says long hair is implied. Now, the word implied means to indicate indirectly or by allusion, to hint or suggest. So the word kome does not mean long hair at all as its primary meaning. Although the way that it's taught in many of our churches, they say, oh, kome means you can never cut your hair. It means long, uncut hair, hair that is permitted to grow without being cut. Well, that's not what the scholars say. Thayer says kome means hair, a head of hair. It differs from thrax, the anatomical or physical term, by designating the hair as an ornament. Kome does not mean long hair primarily. It just hints at long hair. What kome means is hair as an ornament, ornamented hair, ornamental hair, hair that has been fixed in a beautiful way. It means beautified hair. Now, at the bottom of my chart, Link's lexicon, a beginner's lexicon, komao, means to bring hair into a shape, to style the hair. Homosexual prostitutes, the effeminate kind in Corinth, used to get hairdos like women. And this is what is offensive to God. It's not long hair on men that's offensive to God, but it's beautified hair on men that's offensive to God. Now, if long hair on men was offensive to God, God would not command certain men to be Nazarites from their birth, and He did. It wasn't their long hair that offended God, but it's when men let their hair grow long enough where there is a measurable length so that it can be fashioned into a beautiful hairdo. That is what is offensive to God, my friends. Now, one of the secondary meanings of comé is long hair, because hair has to have some length to it in order to fix, in order to do a hairdo. So when the King James translates it long hair, yes, long hair in the sense it's been permitted to grow long enough to fix into a hairdo. But what Paul is saying is, beautified hair is given to a woman for her glory. And it's the beautified hair on men that is offensive to God. Comé, or comeus, means a hairstyle, fashioned, or styled hair. It does not mean long hair as a primary meaning. It means styled or fashioned hair. Now let me talk about the word ante. I usually say anti, but I'll try to use my friend's pronunciation to keep from confusing anyone. Now, this is what A.T. Robertson says, 28, chart 28. Now, I'm defining these words. Come for parabolium. The for here is the word ante. So it means, it's translated for, my friend says it means in place of. A.T. Robertson says, who is a Greek scholar, I don't know how much Greek my friend has studied, but I doubt if he could compare to Mr. Robertson. I know I surely couldn't. And come, or ante, A.T. Robertson defines it as, says, quote, it is not in the place of a veil. Now my friend said it was. A.T. Robertson says it wasn't. If I had to choose who I was going to go with on the authority of the Greek, I would go with Mr. Robertson. He says, quote, it is not in the place of a veil, but answering to, ante, in the sense of ante in John 1:16, as a permanent endowment, whereas the veil is a temporary thing in the meeting place, in the assembly. The hair answers to, it doesn't replace it. It just is an exchange for it. Your long hair is an exchange for the veil in your everyday life. But it is not to replace the veil in the assembly, in the church. And the way I am teaching it is a way it has been understood by Christianity right out of the gate, right when the Apostle Paul wrote the letter. The modern teaching that we have been taught is no more than 100, or few more than 100 years old. And our ministers are sincere. They've only been teaching what has been taught to them, and they're so fearful of leaving what they have called the old landmarks. Well, I tell you what the old landmark is. It's what the apostles practiced, what the first century church practiced, what every century of Christianity practiced, down for 2 millennia, even are still practicing to this very day. Now, the way that ante is understood in this chart 28, Eliot's Commentary of English Readers, but it says, but if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her. Quote, we should follow the suggestions of nature. If a woman has naturally long hair, which is given to her as a covering for her head, the covering of her head can be no shame for her. Therefore, let her wear a veil. The will ought to correspond to nature. And then Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, Bible commentary, her hair for a covering. They say, not that she does not need an additional covering, nay, but her long hair shows she ought to cover her head as much as possible. We ought to do according to nature. Bingo. And then John Chrysostom. And if it be given her for a covering, the long hair, you say, wherefore needs she add another covering? that not nature only, but also her own will may have part in her acknowledgement of subjection, but that thou oughtest to be covered, nature herself, by anticipation enacted a law. Add now, I pray thee, thine own part also, that thou mayest not seem to subvert the very laws of nature, a proof of most insolent rashness, to buffet not only with us, but also with nature. Now, chart 29. If you want to know what the katakalupto is in verse 6, for a woman be not covered, katakalupto is a word, and then let her be covered, katakalupto is a word. In verse 15, we are told what it is. And no, it's not the hair. It is the parabolion. The parabolion is a wrap that wraps around the head. It is a mantle. It is a veil. Strong's Greek number 4018. It is something thrown around one. That is a mantle, a veil, covering, vesture. It's only used one other time in the New Testament, and that is in Hebrews chapter 1 and 12, where it is translated as a veil. So the parabolion, the noun in verse 15, that the hair is answering to, is the katakalupto in the previous verses that has been translated covering. Katakalupto is the parabolion. Katakalupto is the verb in the middle voice that a woman is to cover herself with. And then in verse 15, we are told it is the parabolion. So, my friend, let's look once again at A.T. Robertson, 30, chart 30, in 1 Corinthians 11 and 15, what he has to say about the word ante. He says, for a covering, ante paraboliou, old word from parabolo, to fling around as a mantle, Hebrews 1 and 12, or a covering or as a veil, as here. It is not in the place of a veil. It is not in the place of a veil. It is not in the place of a veil, but answering to the veil. The long hair answers to the parabolion in your day-to-day life. It is an exchange, yes. You exchange your veil that you wear in the church for the long hair that you wear in your everyday life. Come for a parabolion is compared to grace, answering to grace. It is one covering answering to another covering. A.T. Robertson, not in the place of the other covering. Only an exchange, one in the church and one out of the church. Very quickly, let me have my chart, please, number 57. Number 57 in the moment that I have left is a very interesting chart. And we don't have time to get to it tonight, but just let me say this. Two words, komao and ekersikomis. Komao means ornamental hair, beautified hair. Ekersikomins means uncut hair. There was a Greek word that meant uncut hair, but Paul didn't use it. He meant the hair that meant ornamental hair, not uncut hair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being so kind in these 2 nights of discussion. Listen to my friend in his final denial speech. God bless you all.